What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, March 30th, 2018. It's Good Friday. Easter, of course, is coming up on this Sunday. And we have lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And sadly, because it is Good Friday and Claire is involved at her church, she will not be joining us in hour number 3 today. So let's get on into it here. And starting right off here with Jeff Sessions. As you know, yesterday Jeff Sessions refused to appoint a second special counsel to probe FBI misconduct. Now, today he's trying to sort of deal with the backlash from that by saying that he's named this federal prosecutor out in, I think it's Utah, to look into the matter. But once again, we're seeing we have an attorney general whose job it is to protect certain people from the letter of the law. And apparently Sessions has also got himself back on the cover of Time magazine. And both of these are an annoyance to Donald Trump. And a lot of people are saying it may be time for Sessions to go. Certainly we're getting that from Larry Klayman down there at Freedom Watch, saying that it's time for Sessions to be let go. And of course, Klayman is out there saying that he wants to be named special counsel, looking into some of these government misbehavior by the FBI and the Department of Justice. I personally think it would be a really great idea. And he's trying to get a petition with enough signatures, which unfortunately will probably be ignored by everybody in the deep state. But yeah, Klayman would be great. I've been following him for a lot of years, and he's anti-corruption. He does not have a political party bias. I first became aware of him all the way back 24 years ago when he was still in charge of Judicial Watch, and they were looking into the Vince Foster case. So, anyway, story coming out of Zero Hedge. Apparently, former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe lied 4 separate times to the Department of Justice and the FBI, including 2 times while under oath with Inspector General Michael Horowitz. This is coming from Representative Jim Jordan in an interview on Fox News. And this is the first time the public has heard more details of the circumstances behind the decision to fire McCabe, just over 1 day before he qualified for his full pension. He's still getting a partial pension. But he was lying, and he's not supposed to do that. Now, apparently there's been another FBI agent, Terry James Albury, who worked in counterterrorism, who has been exposed as one of the leaks, leaking classified information to the corporate media, and he's now been charged with 1 count of knowingly and willfully transmitting documents and information relating to national defense to a reporter for a national news organization. And apparently he's also refusing to hand over documents to the government. So he's in trouble, but he's kind of small fry. He's not one of the ringleaders. Now, getting on back to Hillary Clinton, apparently she's now appearing in public with a cast on her arm from where she broke her wrist slipping in a bathtub. And her star has definitely fallen. In fact, right now, she has suffered a 90% cut in speaking fees. Right now, she's only getting 1/10 of the money for a public speech that she was getting at the height of her career, at the height of her candidacy, and so forth. So apparently, she's got a speaking engagement at one of New Jersey's universities. And no, it's not Princeton. They're not saying exactly where it is. But she's had to take a major hit on the speaking fees. So her star is very much on the wane. I'm still concerned that she's going to come back in 2020 and try for the White House again, which will force me to back Donald Trump again for re-election. But if anybody else is running on the Democratic ticket, Trump does not get my support this next time. He has betrayed his base. He is not keeping his promises. Rather than draining the swamp, he's become the swamp thing himself. and I'm very, very disappointed in him, to put it mildly. So getting onto the war zones here, apparently Russian forces have foiled a series of suicide bombings in eastern Ghouta. The militants are all but gone from that part of Syria, and apparently they have resorted to the tactic of terror bombings to try and reverse the trend. Apparently the suicide bombers were going to be put on the buses carrying the refugees out of Ghouta. And Russian military basically confiscated 7 belts on March 26th, 32 suicide belts on March 27th, and 9 more belts on March 28th. So Syrian pro-government activists believe that members of Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham, which are part of the evacuation deal, may have been behind the attempted suicide bombings aimed at sabotaging the ongoing evacuation agreement. We're going to take a moment here to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, the humanitarian pauses that are allowing the civilians to leave East Ghouta and for militants who have laid down their arms to withdraw has now been extended. And apparently the Falak al-Rahman militants from Arbil are basically leaving for Idlib for the de-escalation zone. So it's going very well there. And this may be the reason that Trump yesterday said that we're leaving Syria and we'll let somebody else take care of it. Why not let Syria take care of Syria? Seems like an easy idea. Down in Turkey, President Erdogan is saying that Turkey is ready to attack the U.S.-backed Kurds in Manbij. So that part of Syria is still very much in play. Again, the U.S. should have just left well enough alone. Now, the reason I'm saying that Trump is saying that we're leaving Syria is there are indications to the contrary. In fact, apparently the Defense Department is saying they have heard absolutely no word about starting to leave Syria. And more importantly, more telling, over at the pacobserver.net, they have a story about how United States and British and Jordan are deploying troops and tanks on the border with South Syria. And basically they have aerial photos from Syria's Joint Operations Command showing the heavy military presence of U.S., UK, Jordanian troops on the Syria-Jordan border areas. Now, this seems to contradict Trump's statement that the U.S. is giving up on Syria, which means that if Trump made that statement, but they're still planning on attacking, then there has to be some kind of a false flag to say, oh, gee, look what happens. We said we were going to leave Syria, and look what Bashar al-Assad did, and golly gee whiz, we got to go on in, and we got to just give them what for. Now, over at the United Nations, Nikki Haley is out there just screaming and yelling and tearing her hair out about Russia, blaming them for the, you'll pardon the expression, fall of Syria's eastern Ghouta. Well, from the point of view of Syria's government, it's the liberation of eastern Ghouta. So Nikki Haley basically is condemning the forced surrender of one of the last rebel-held enclaves in Syria, and basically is accusing the Syrian government of using the UN-backed ceasefire to accomplish it. Nikki is also blaming Russia for supporting Syrian President Bashar Assad and playing a central role in the bombing of Syrian civilians into submission. Now, that one's a flat-out lie. The U.S. has been bombing civilian infrastructure under the pretext of going after ISIS and al-Qaeda, which we now know were working with the U.S. against Assad. So I guess one of the requirements to be a UN ambassador is very much like the corporate media. You have to be able to stand there with your hair on fire and insist you cannot smell any smoke. Now, as you know, right now we're in this period where the U.S. and its vassal states are expelling Russian diplomats, and Russia is expelling U.S. diplomats. The U.S. closed a consulate general in Seattle. Russia's closed the U.S. consulate general in St. Petersburg, and they're just going back and forth, back and forth. And it does demonstrate that relations between the U.S. and Russia are deteriorating rapidly. And the White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders basically came on out and said that Russia's response was not unanticipated and the United States will deal with it, meaning there's going to be something else to poke the bear to get this war rolling here. Washington has also declared the Russian trade envoy to the U.S. persona non grata, meaning you have about a week to get out of town. And the Russian representative, Alexander Stadnik, said that he wasn't really surprised based on what's been going on here. Now, in response to the expulsions, the Defense Ministry of Russia has launched a Russian missile drill in coordination with 10,000 troops on the highest combat alert. And they're taking 3 missile armies of Russia's strategic missile force. These are the guys with the really big rockets and the really big bombs. And they've been ordered to go on highest combat alert because of the political crisis. It's just amazing. Now, story that's coming on out of Zero Hedge is that on the same phone call where Donald Trump congratulated Putin for his re-election victory, which everybody got their knickers in a twist over, that he also came on out and said that if Russia wants an arms race, we can do that, obviously responding to Putin's State of the Union speech with the revelation about these new wonder weapons. And again, all this chest thumping going on here. Possibly in response to Trump's comment, Russia has now fired a second test of the Sarmat missile. Now, this one is a game changer. The Sarmat has a speed of Mach 20. Can't quite get into orbit, but almost as fast. It carries a payload of 10 tons, meaning it can carry up to 24 of Russia's new Avangard hypersonic glide vehicles. Now, these are the reentry vehicles that are maneuverable. They can make high-speed evasion maneuvers, and they come down very fast. Putin has described them as striking like a meteorite, like a fireball. And a little later in the show, we're going to have some more of Russia's new weapons that weren't even mentioned in his speech. Stephen Cohen is out there. Now, first of all, he's professor emeritus of Russian studies and politics at NYU and Princeton. And he's out there saying that all of these unproven allegations against Trump and Putin are bringing us closer to an outright nuclear war. And he's talking about Russiagate and the Skripal affair, neither of which seem to have any basis in reality. But the U.S. is pushing Russiagate, the U.S. media. The British media is still on the Skripal affair, and they're out there they're just escalating the situation, and it is very, very reckless situation. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Nobody's backing down, Mike. We're at war already. It hasn't gone hot yet, but it's going because Putin's not leaving Syria. He's not going to back down because after going through all this trouble, he'll look too weak. And he ain't moving, you know,
Nope.
And it's up to Trump to, decide what he's going to do. But, yeah, I mean, they're crazy, Mike. Like, this is worse than the Cold War. I mean, people don't realize it because they're not being told anything. But we're in some serious trouble.
Yeah, we are.
Those Sarmat, Mike, those Sarmats, they already got them in the silos.
Yes.
They're just doing a few tests, but they already have some in the
Are you there?
to go,
Okay, I lost your sound there for a second.
Yes, these weapons are ready to go, Mike. Like, I don't know how much more Russia... They had a former Israeli ambassador says, this got to stop. Like, we're getting pushed to the brink.
I agree.
No,
I
like,
agree.
I mean,
We're being pushed to the brink of war by the military-industrial complex and all the war hawks like John Bolton and John McCain, who think war is not only cool, they even actually believe nuclear war is winnable. And they think that because they've got their bunkers, but they don't seem to realize that if there is a full-on total nuclear exchange between the U.S. and Russia and China, there will be so much radioactivity, it will kill the surface of the planet. And when they come up out of their bunkers after they've run out of food and storable water, they're going to come up to basically a desert planet. There's going to be nothing to eat, nothing will grow. It's going to be on the beach for real.
Mike, but people don't understand. We don't have any real diplomats anymore. Like, they're all like either former cheerleaders in their high school or in the geek squad in the high school. I mean, there's just no diplomacy. This is what's scary. It's just children, and in Britain and here. You look at Nikki Haley and then Boris Johnson, people like that. And this is all we got. It's scary, Mike.
It is scary. It is scary. I mean, Nikki Haley is up there at the United Nations to sell the agenda that the world must go to war against Russia.
And all it takes is a spark, Mike, because the rhetoric keeps going higher and higher. Did you hear about Britain? They went onto a Russian airline that landed, and they kicked the flight crew off, searching the plane or something. I mean, that's a provocation. Also, they're going to keep doing this? Keep poking the bear?
Apparently. Apparently they really are. And, with this heightened tension, all it's going to take is one mistake to set things off. Even if the planners behind all of this are just pushing for a new Cold War to plunder the people for the military-industrial complex, during the last Cold War, there were some near misses. And in addition to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which came dangerously close to a launch, there have actually been accidents involving nuclear weapons that almost resulted in a launch. You've all seen the movie War Games. That's actually based on something that really happened in Cheyenne Mountain. Now, there wasn't a kid with a computer outside, but somebody inside Cheyenne Mountain put a training tape on for the displays and didn't announce it. And all those people at those consoles were looking at what they thought was a real Russian attack. And it got dangerously close to a missile launch on our side before somebody said, hey, this is a training simulation. And there have been a couple of other mistakes involving near launches of weapons, electronics failure. We shouldn't be here. It's very dangerous to be here, especially because we're only here because somebody's making money off of all of this.
And Mike, real quick, I just want to switch gears. You had a gentleman who called and he was talking about the two, and you mentioned it also, the Israeli so-called F-35s that flew over Iran. They didn't do anything, right? They flew back. I think that's a BS story, Mike, because it came from the Jerusalem Post. It was originally from a Kuwaiti newspaper, which is owned by a Kuwaiti who's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. It probably has stock in Lockheed Martin. I would take it.
Well, actually, you're not the only person. You're not the only person who thinks the story is bogus, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show. But a lot of people are starting to cast doubt on that story, that it may have just been pure propaganda to scare Iran, to provoke Iran, or to bolster the reputation of the F-35, which is, to be very honest, not very good.
Now, how does that work? They can pick up stealth fighters or any stealth because of long way. Was it UHF?
No, VHF radars, when the U.S. flew those F-22s along the Korean border, China called down and said, we can see those things on our older radar. And that's why I was kind of wondering about this story from the beginning. But now other people have expressed doubts about that. Anyway, Dustin, I need to let you go. We need to do a commercial break. We've got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, welcome back to our show here. And before we take the next phone call, folks, we are really in a war between the corporate media and the independent media. And the corporate media is pulling out all the stops to try and silence us, as the promo said, to take away our advertisers. Advertisers are being threatened. They're playing dirty. And we need your help. There's no other way to put it. We're not going to be able to continue unless you are willing to step forward and join with us. So if you are able to, the postal address to send check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you want to call on in and pledge to be a recurring subscriber, that number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. The network thanks you, and obviously donors to whatreallyhappened.com, I thank you, because it's really needed and it's appreciated. Even little tiny donations. If everybody listening to this program sent just $5 to RBN, it would make a tremendous difference. Okay, let's go back to the phone lines now. Mike in Kentucky, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I've heard, and I guess William Benny confirmed it. I guess other people have confirmed it. They're scanning like every piece of mail. So if you're going to send cash donations, probably the old thing that I used to hear years ago was to fold it up in like a foil or something opaque, so that the postal workers won't by chance see through the envelope and see there's cash.
Yeah,
in there.
I've gotten some donations that way, where it's an envelope with no return address, and inside is a foil packet
with some cash. Yeah, yes. The scanners can detect it apparently, and I would say Mylar might even work better, because I have to wonder if they detect metal, if it would flag it, So maybe a Mylar, something you can't see, with light see through there, so the postal workers by chance wouldn't steal it. But what I talked about, or what I called to talk about, was just some of the absurdity that, I don't know, I had to read. We had phase elective science fiction when I was in high school. I had to read Alas, Babylon, and I read some other science fiction, Down to a Sunless Sea, and some of these other, post-apocalyptic novels. So, I mean, I knew even before Fukushima happened that if the power, it just takes, a couple of grid. Didn't they have a near space detonation that took the grid out in Hawaii?
Yeah, they did. It was the first test of a nuclear weapon outside the atmosphere, and they were not expecting what happened, which is that it generated an EMP pulse, and it knocked out the power and radios right here on the island of Hawaii.
Well, it's probably in 1990. I think I was watching CNN, and you know how they used to repeat stuff like every 4 hours. You'd see the same stories for like 2 days. I saw the story over and over again. This guy had invented a way to take the waste plasma slag coming off of steel mills and drop those pellets out of the fuel rods in there, spaced apart where they couldn't reach criticality, and you created this inert ingot of the stuff that could be loaded around with a forklift and put on a truck and dumped off in the ocean somewhere, and it would allow the fuel pellets to go, decay over time into something that would be inert, or you could put it down a salt mine or something like that. So to me, it looks like increasingly that they do not want to do anything with this nuclear waste sitting around, because at least for the initial 6 years that these fuel rods are hot and sitting in the cooling ponds, it is a de facto doomsday weapon, just like it's depicted in Dr. Strangelove. If anybody, North Korea never did need a reentry vehicle. All they'd have to do is pop one good nuke over top of Kansas, somewhere that would take down the electrical grid of the United States. And like the end of Hunt, you remember the end of Hunt for Red October, when the lieutenant on the Russian submarine says, "You idiot, you've killed us," because they took all the safety measures off of the torpedo. It would cause 90 Fukushimas or more, because some of these nuclear sites in the U.S. have multiple the times of fuel sitting around that Fukushima has. So once it goes criticality, or once it evaporates the water out of the fueling pond, catches on fire, ignites the hydrogen, and it starts spraying these fuel pellets out, in a gray plume. And in the United States, of course, Japan could not make use of the fuel for plutonium, so they did mixed oxide fuel, which means that they had to remix the plutonium back in to use the fuel rods. Well, that made that explosion a little more dangerous because of the plutonium, but it looks like most of the nuclear industry in the United States is basically just to make fuel for nuclear weapons. I mean,
That's
really
exactly right. That's why they go with uranium fission rather than, for example, a thorium cycle reactor. We're almost out of time here. The reason that all of this nuclear waste is being neglected and ignored comes down to money. It's not a deliberate plot to have a doomsday weapon. But you're absolutely right. If we lost our electric grid for long enough and the emergency generators ran out of fuel at these cooling ponds, yeah, it's going to be a major, major problem. Anyway, Mike, got to let you go. Got to take another break here for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And in the spirit of Easter and resurrection, remember last week when the news was saying that Skripal and his daughter had only a 1% chance of ever recovering, and that a judge was going to make a decision whether to pull him off life support. All of a sudden, the daughter has woken up, and she is eating by herself and talking. And apparently that other police officer is doing very well as well. So, well, good. I'm glad she's doing better here. Now, over at Russia Today, Neil Clark is quoted as saying that Britain may be repeating mistakes they made back in 2003 when the British government used completely fraudulent intelligence to stir up a war. And Clark added that the British Skripal theory has more holes than a slab of Swiss cheese. And he's absolutely right about that. And after all the times we have been lied into wars, whether it was Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, or Assad's sarin gas, or torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, or a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, and so forth and so forth and so forth, we should be very suspect about this story, especially in the absence of any evidence whatsoever. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Bob in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael.
Yes?
The guy in England that supposedly was poisoned by the Russians, I would think he may have gotten food poisoning or something like that. If you've ever been to London, you'll notice that one of the things is the whole place stinks like a sewer. They have very poor sanitation, and yet the population keeps growing and growing.
Well,
much like the same problem they have in California. They keep growing the population.
I was in London back in the 80s, and it certainly wasn't a problem then. I didn't notice any problems then. And I know that other people have floated the idea that the Skripals actually did get food poisoning, and that Theresa May just seized on the opportunity to try and blow this up to attack Russia. But I don't see Theresa May and these other people just sitting around waiting for something to happen that they can exploit to go after Russia. And I do think something was done to the Skripals. It may not have been Novichok, but I think something definitely was done to them.
Yeah, well, I guess the other point I was trying to make is that the populations of these large cities keep growing, and their water systems and sewer systems are not meant to handle it. They're not building them any bigger. They're just taking in more people and expecting the existing systems to work, and they won't.
Well, that's hardly confined to London. We're seeing it all over the United States. We're seeing it right here in Hawaii. The population of this island has almost doubled since Claire and I moved here, but they're not expanding the roads. They're not even properly maintaining the roads. We've got the worst roads in the nation. They took a lane out of the Kamehameha Highway for that light rail project, and Kamehameha is all torn up. So we're seeing that all over the place where these refugees and illegal immigrants are being brought in. We're seeing it in California. Their infrastructure is overstressed. It's hardly unique to London.
Your tax dollars at work. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, anytime somebody wants to demonize a country, what do? They come on out and compare them to Nazi Germany. And British Defense Secretary Gavin Williamson is basically out there at the forefront trying to equate that Russia is going to be using the World Cup the way Hitler used the 1936 Olympics in Germany. So, I mean, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel for propaganda devices they can use against Russia. All right, let's take some more phone calls. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. Robert Mueller is on my mind, and not the whole Russian collusion thing. The questions that I think all of us need to start asking is, who is Robert Mueller? I know there's some tie-up with Adam Weissman and the whole Boston thing, but I think there's some more, and besides the Comey and the whole, and I forget the name of the bank, but I think we should dig down into who he really is and show how corrupt and how dirty of a cop he really is.
Well, a lot of people have already done that. We've posted some of the articles at whatreallyhappened.com, and I think it's becoming very obvious that to reach the highest levels of government, the highest levels of the FBI, you have to be willing to do the dirty work of those in power.
Why is that, if I may ask?
Because those in power need somebody that they can count on to do the dirty work, like kill the deputy White House counsel and make it look like a suicide.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Is it because the dirtier you are, the higher up in power you get because you're going to cover your boss's crimes? Or is this because, oh, we have some dirt on you, do what we say, like blackmail? Like, this whole thing just seems backwards on how a system ought to work.
Well, it's a combination of the two reasons that you gave here, and very often reminds me of a quote from one of the Godfather movies. I think it was the third one in the franchise, where Michael Corleone is talking about how hard he's worked to take the family straight and law-abiding, and then he says, the higher I go, the crookeder it gets. And I think that was one of the best statements to come out of that franchise.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the only reason why I was thinking the way I was thinking on the way back home here, I was listening to a little bit of Hannity, and he's digging into who Robert Mueller is. And I know you've done a lot of work, and a lot of people have done a lot of work to expose who he is. Is the people don't care? Are they tired of it? Or are they just got their heads shoved in their phones so much that they can't even pay attention to what's really going on around them?
Well, I think people are starting to pay attention to what's going on. And unfortunately, they're still waiting for somebody else to do something. They're waiting for the Attorney General to do his job. They're waiting for the FBI to really do its job. They're still waiting for Donald Trump to keep his campaign promises. But as you can tell from some of the phone calls that we have been getting at the show, people are now getting to the point of saying, we have to do something. And that's a very dangerous situation for the country to be in. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that all during our life, we get told you can't fight City Hall. There's really nothing that you can do about it, so don't worry about it. And that's a message we get from TV. It's a message we get from schools. And I remember when I was first starting out my website, I got a lot of emails saying, do you really think you're going to have any impact at all on any of this? And while I have not had the impact I had hoped for, obviously, I think the independent media has brought about an important change in giving rise to a much more skeptical and distrusting population. We have taken away from the corporate media and the government their ability to lie with impunity. And I think those are victories that we can look at with a small sense of accomplishment.
I totally agree. And this sounds like one thing I learned in my political science class, and it was talking about traditionalism. The tradition is let the ones in power or the elite actually be the ones that govern because, we, the common people, don't belong in politics. And I always disagree with my poli-sci teacher over that, with the whole traditionalism form of government. But, I think it's coming to the point where we the people is not the elite class. That's we the people, everybody in the country. I mean, you said it before, and I always feel this way, that, government is supposed to serve us. We're not to be serving government. And I think a lot of these people in politics, like the representatives, congressmen, and everything, I think they forget that. I think they really think or forget that they're, a public servant. They serve the people, and they just serve their own interests or special interests. But I would love to see all special interests get taken out of politics and all the dirty money and big money be taken out. But, is that constituting a new form of government then? Or, because I think constitutional conventions would be a great thing, but at the same token, I can see where they would be a bad thing too.
Well, let me go on back here. The way this nation was originally set up, it was a republic, and we the people chose those who would run it for us. And over time, that system has become corrupted. And by the way, Thomas Jefferson himself predicted that this daring experiment in government that he created was not going to last forever, because over time it would be corrupted by those who sought power and wealth and influence for their own ends. And it's certainly true here. Critical to regaining control over these politicians is an honest election system, because right now the American people are totally disenfranchised. The members of the House and the Senate and even the White House, present company accepted, are just used to the idea that whoever has the best election rigors is going to get those offices. And that's why they're more or less tuned out to what their constituents need. They're there to basically sell favors to corporate interests and foreign governments.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that's all I wanted to pick your brain about. I hope you give Miss Claire the best, and I hope you have a great and wonderful rest of the show.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. And we're going to switch over to Peter in California. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I wanted to point out the similarities of what is going on, all the common threads of what's going on around the world when Trump runs on a sort of rapprochement with Russia, and of course the intelligence community and the left, funded by Soros, the biggest backer of the Clintons, and all these people have smear campaigns. They fund whenever anything comes out. It's become impossible for Trump to actually even have any kind of meaningful discussion with the Russians. Then we have, of course, the reason why we're in Syria to begin with is because the Israeli lobby owns Congress and the presidency, frankly. But then you go over to Britain, and they've been unable to really move the American public. We're so used to the false flag crap. But now we have this deal with the poisoning, completely unproven.
Yes.
All these allegations, just like the dodgy dossier was, 15 years ago. But they prepared all this prior to that. As you pointed out, I think it was yesterday, all the expulsions were ready to go in multiple countries. But also, I know you've been following it, the labor, the Zionists have been cleaning out the British Labour Party, which was their only opposition,
Yes.
and hurling spurious charges of anti-Semitism and basically ethnic cleansing anybody who isn't Israel first. All this is in preparation for this. So they've been shouted into submission, just like the people have been shouted into submission who would back a rapprochement with Russia here, and then we have all this coming up with the P5+1 is coming up for either we're going to stay at it or not. All the voices now who are for staying in it have been removed or muted, and all the people who have are the most militant John Bolton type people, and Jeremy Corbyn's adversaries in England, everywhere in the world, they've been muted, and so to me, this is all related. We wouldn't be in Syria. We wouldn't be in the Ukraine, frankly. We wouldn't, all these false flags, all the preparation of all this stuff with the shout downs and the false flags and cleansing people of through false charges, echoed by the intelligence agencies and the Israeli-controlled press.
Yeah,
that's the point I wanted to make today.
Yeah, it is a mess there, and there's no question that the government of Israel does have tremendous influence over matters inside our country. We're living under foreign puppet rule, and we should be no more happy about it than the people of other countries living under foreign puppet rule are, whether that's Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Yemen. It's not a pleasant thing. We have a Vichy government inside Washington, D.C., and they continually show they're far more concerned with what's going on with Israel than what's going on here in the United States of America, because Israel gives them lots of money to win elections with. Israel influences the American corporate media as to which candidate to support, and it really is a totally messed up system. And it reminds us of the wisdom of George Washington in his farewell address, who said, "Beware of foreign entanglements." One of the articles we put up at whatreallyhappened.com today is basically listing American politicians who hold dual citizenship with Israel. And that should not be allowed to happen. In other countries, you're not allowed to be in the government if you're a dual citizen. Those countries want people in government who are loyal to that country and that country alone. And our country is just being strip-mined and handed out to not only to Israel, but to the illegal immigrants and the refugees. We're being torn apart.
Mike, it's the fifth column. And by the way, I just read on your website that so far today, there's 1,400 wounded and 14 dead in the Palestinian demonstrations.
Yes.
Peaceful demonstrations, by the way, except for the Israeli Nazis firing into them. But let's watch to see how that's covered in the United States.
Well, it won't be covered in the corporate media. There won't be a single peep about it. That's why the independent media has to cover these things. And by the way, it's 15 dead now.
And that's probably understated, but it's unbelievable. We're nose to nose with the Russians in two countries. We killed 300 Russians a couple of weeks ago, and all this against all American interests. We have no interest in Syria or Lebanon, for God's sake.
Well, the interest is a stepping stone to confrontation with Iran, and there was also a pipeline route of way that was involved as well. Same reason we went into Afghanistan, an oil pipeline. Peter, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the telephones now. Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Trump and CNN's on my mind. Trump, like any other entertainer, is a product of scouts in the entertainment industry, a.k.a. the mafia. The Washington Post reported that in 2016, CNN had a gross profit of $1 billion. Now, these entertainment, these cable news networks, and the big ones were all on their deathbed. But Trump, the ratings machine, brought them all back to life. Now, isn't that sweet? Trump is not a friend of working class people, and we're all going to find that out. If you're still on the Trump train, just look in the mirror and see how big your ego is. It's just not letting you admit that you made a mistake. This guy is bad news. I don't see anything good coming out of Donald Trump. He just said that we're getting out of Syria. We're going to let other people do it. If you believe that, we have a real problem.
Well, like I said, the fact that U.S. forces, along with British and Jordanians, are massing on the border is reason to doubt, what Trump said. And I don't know why he said it. Maybe he's trying to convince the Russians to leave, but they're not going to leave anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, just look at the figures. Trump's a ratings machine. This media doesn't hate Trump. They love him. This is all a TV reality show.
I disagree with that. The media is still overwhelmingly liberal, and with the exception of Fox News, they're still pushing this whole Trump-Russia collusion.
Well, look, Trump's a New York liberal. This is all a hoax. This is all a hoax. In my opinion, Mueller's going to be there 3 years from now shuffling papers through folders. Just watch what happens. I don't think Trump is going to do us anything but protect his people that put him into office. Okay. Thanks for taking my call. Bye.
Well, yes, Trump is going to protect the people who put him into office. He's going to be doing favors for the people who funded him. That's how politics really works. But I think this idea that there's some kind of a monolithic, unified system of government and media guiding the nation forward is flawed. I'm seeing deep factions emerging. Different little groups that have different agendas, and they're literally at war with each other. We're still seeing the Democrats at war with Donald Trump. If they succeed in taking Congress this November, I do think they're going to move forward and try and impeach him, claiming that the firing of James Comey represented obstruction of justice. Ricky, you there? Nope, guess he left us. All right. Okay, now, more concerns going on here, again, with this. Theresa May is just pushing this new Cold War, which has a risk of becoming a hot war. And she's basically pushing not only against Russia, she's now escalating her talk about the need to deal with North Korea. And so they're all ramping up. Again, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that these governments of these nations and the European Union have become very unpopular with their people, and they need enemies and wars to try and get loyalty back. That if they get a war going, we'll salute the flag, we'll forget all about the mishandling of our nations, and send our children off to war. Don't think it's going to happen. Don't think it's going to work that way. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Turkey is breaking with NATO. They're refusing to expel Russian diplomats. So more and more countries are basically jumping off this Skripal bandwagon, if you will. And basically, the Turkish government came on out and said there is a positive and good relationship between Turkey and Russia. And I'm sure that that botched coup d'etat a few years back probably had some influence on that decision here. Now, the Kremlin is out there talking about the propaganda that has been coming out about that shopping mall fire in Russia, in Kemerovo. And apparently there's a lot of hysterical reporting coming on out claiming that hundreds died, that it was terrible, there's no building safety, and so forth and so on. And the Kremlin is saying that most of these fake reports on the Russian mall fire are coming from Ukraine, which makes sense. Ukraine wants to badmouth Russia, and Turkey, which is a little bit more of a head scratcher. But apparently a Moscow court arrested in absentia a Ukrainian prankster who's been spreading false information about the number of the victims in the accident. So there's a lot of lies out there, and we all have to be very skeptical, and we have to be careful, and we have to be analytical, that we are able to separate propaganda out from real information. Remember, truth is the first casualty of war, and we're at that stage here. Now, flipping on back to Syria, this story just came on in. This is from FortRuss.com, and apparently the Russian Foreign Ministry, through spokesman Maria Zakharova, is expressing concern about U.S.-led activities in the Al-Tanf region of Syria on the Jordanian border, because heavy equipment is now arriving there. By heavy equipment, of course, they mean main battle tanks, self-propelled artillery, and so forth and so on. Now, the Al-Tanf military base is an illegal U.S. installation. The U.S. did not have permission from Damascus to build a military base on Syrian soil. So now we're seeing the deployment of this heavy equipment across the border from Jordan in Syria itself. So I don't know what Trump was saying about we're leaving Syria, but there's cause to doubt that that's really what's going on. And if he said that to placate the anti-war people in this country or to get the Russians to relax, but at the same time they're obviously preparing for a major campaign, then there's going to be a false flag. And it could very easily be some kind of a chemical weapon attack right here in the United States of America to be blamed on Assad. But again, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a motive for Assad to do something that stupid, knowing what would result. Now, as you know, earlier in the show, we had somebody call on in and say that the story about Israel flying 2 F-35s into Iran, flying around, targeting sites, and getting on out without being detected was suspect. And that opinion is being shared over at The Aviationist, saying that there are too many weird things about this story. And first of all is the source. Al Jazeera is often used to deliver Israeli propaganda and PSYOPs messages. The Israeli Air Force operates more than 7 F-35s, at least 9. We don't really know how many our government has given them. And their range is about 2,000 kilometers. So it does not allow the aircraft in stealth mode to fly to Iran twice without a stopover or aerial refueling. And those aerial refueling aircraft are not radar stealthy. In order to fly from Israel to Iran, the F-35 has to have external fuel tanks, and those are not radar stealthy. I remember when the B-2 first came on out, and there was a joke circulating around saying, there are no aircraft on our radar screens, but there are these 2 helmets side by side at 40,000 feet. Story coming out of Press TV, Secretary of Defense Mattis has now admitted that the U.S. military is basically in charge of the Saudi Arabia forces inside Yemen. The U.S. military is doing the planning. They're involved in battlefield management. This is a U.S. war on Yemen using Saudi forces and assets. And, of course, the U.S. is also providing weapons to Saudi Arabia. They're supplying mid-air refueling. This is all about countries who just want to mind their own business. That's what it was about. Several years ago, the U.S. went into Yemen and they staged one of their regime changes, and they put in a puppet government, a ruling junta. And the people of Yemen don't want to be ruled by foreign puppet governments. So they kicked the puppets out and they set up their own domestic government, and that's what triggered the current situation. The U.S. wanted to go back into Yemen and slap them down and say, once you are under our puppet rule, once you are a vassal state, you will stay that way. And that's the whole point of this U.S.-backed, U.S.-controlled Saudi attack on Yemen, to basically bomb, kill, and starve them into accepting foreign puppet rule. And I have to admit, there's a lot of respect for the people of Yemen, because they're just being pounded on and they will not back down. We're going to take a minute here to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, up in Afghanistan, the U.S. military is planning to basically loot Afghan mineral deposits for some time. And apparently the New York Times back in 2010 quoted a 2007 Pentagon memo saying that Afghanistan could be the Saudi Arabia of lithium. So companies here in the United States of America are planning to basically extract Afghanistan's enormous reserves of valuable rare earth minerals. These are the ones that the electronic industry is highly dependent on. And they're basically justifying it, saying, well, this is how we're going to defray the cost of U.S. assistance to Afghanistan's U.S. puppet government. And the U.S. Geological Survey is estimating the total value of Afghanistan's mineral wealth at roughly $1 trillion with a T dollars. So now Turkey has arrested 6 members of the Gulen movement in Kosovo, and these 6 are thought to have taken part in the aborted coup d'etat against Erdogan in 2016, which Erdogan is still convinced was backed by the U.S. and directed by Fethullah Gulen, who is still living inside the United States of America. And according to Turkey, the people arrested are accused of helping what are called FETO members flee Turkey to countries like the United States of America. Now, as one of our callers just mentioned, there is a demonstration by the people of Gaza celebrating what is called Land Day. And they're basically marching along the border with Israel. They're basically marching up to the bars of their cage. But it's been a peaceful protest. And Israeli troops have now killed 15 Palestinians and wounded 1,500 other. They're using live ammunition. They're using drones that drop tear gas on the Gaza protesters. And you won't see that on the American corporate media either. Now, yesterday we were talking about how Israeli forces assaulted and beat Palestinian Christians during the Palm Sunday celebrations last Sunday. Well, apparently in advance of Easter, Israel is blocking Palestinian Christians in Gaza from praying at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem this Easter. And that, of course, is the church where Christians believe Jesus was buried and resurrected. So obviously for Easter, it's a very important holiday. And Israel is also imposing a tight closure on all Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip for 9 days around Passover. Now, over in Europe, a Palestinian Dutch citizen is suing 2 senior Israeli military commanders for the bombing of his family's home during Israel's 2014 attack on the Gaza Strip. And on July 20th of that year, without warning, an Israeli airstrike destroyed the house in the Al-Barij refugee camp in central Gaza, killing 6 members of Ismail Zaida's family and a 7th person who just happened to be visiting. Now, Ziada now lives in the Netherlands, and he's married to a Dutch citizen, and he was not allowed to attend the funerals of his family members due to Israel's blockade on Gaza. So he's trying to sue them in court. I wish him luck. I don't think anything will happen, but I do wish him luck. Now, Israel has pledged a record $705 million to Israel for missile defense system. And supposedly, this is to allow Israel to build long-range interceptors to deflect a missile attack coming in from Iran. The reality is that most of the money is going to go to the Iron Dome system, which is used primarily for shooting down makeshift rockets from the Gaza Strip, because they go through a lot of those Iron Dome missiles. Those makeshift rockets don't fly straight. They usually are corkscrewing, and that makes them almost impossible to hit. And so Israel will fire something like 10 Iron Dome missiles to get just one of those makeshift rockets. Now, I want to remind everybody that back in 1976, there was a law passed by Congress, signed by the President, called the International Security Assistance and Arms Export Control Act. And it, along with so many other laws like the Glenn Act and the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act, specifically says the United States government cannot give financial aid to Israel because it is in possession of nuclear weapons technology and refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So our government is basically breaking the law every time it sends even a penny of your money to Israel. And frankly, as long as we have American citizens sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash dumpsters, this government has no business sending any money to any government outside our borders. It's an absolute betrayal of the American people. Now, over in South Korea, they're moving closer to this meeting between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-il, and I'm sorry, Kim Jong-un, and they're slated to meet in person on April 27th. And this is the first time in 11 years that the heads of state from the 2 Koreas have met, and it's all moving along positively. And the U.S. is not happy with this. And apparently the U.S. has been putting pressure on South Korea to just call this meeting off. And South Korea is standing up to the U.S. and saying that, you know, this really isn't any business of the United States until Donald Trump himself actually takes part. Now, Trump is now saying that he may hold up the new South Korea trade pact until a deal is made with North Korea. This is an attempt to get South Korea on board with the U.S. agenda against North Korea. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work. South Korea, like China, is a manufacturing powerhouse. They manufacture electronics, they manufacture cars, and people all over the world buy them. South Korea doesn't really need the United States economically, and I don't think this is going to work. Now, as you know, when Putin had their equivalent of the State of the Union speech, he announced several new weapon systems. Some are still in final testing, some are actually out in the field. But it turns out Russia has some other game-changing weapons that weren't in the speech. Now, one of them is the new KH-32 air-to-surface missile. This went into service in 2016, and after being launched, the KH-32 climbs up to the stratosphere, 130,000 feet for the mid-course phase of its flight, and as it nears its target, it goes into a steep dive. It comes down from almost directly overhead, and the attack is too fast and the missile too maneuverable for the enemy to mount an air defense. All of our defensive systems are based on the doctrine of a predictable inbound ballistic path. And it just doesn't work. Now, this missile, if it chooses to, can come straight down, then level off and fly at an altitude as low as 5 meters, meaning it's lost in the radar clutter from the surface of the ocean. And it can get to within 10 kilometers of its target. And that leaves a reaction window of 10 seconds before the missile hits. And is clearly aimed at systems like aircraft carriers and large surface ships. The weapon has an inertial navigation system and a seeker head. It does not need navigation satellites. And it can't be jammed. The KH-32 has a range of roughly 620 miles and a speed of over 5,400 kilometers per hour. It carries a 500-kilogram warhead, and it can also carry a nuclear warhead. The U.S. doesn't have anything like it. It doesn't have an effective system to defend against it. Even the Aegis Standard Missile 6s are useless against this new weapon. Russia is getting very heavily into combat robots. The U.S. has been doing that as well. You've probably seen all the videos on YouTube coming out of Boston Dynamics. But Russia actually has them out in the field. Some of them are tracked robotic tanks, robotic weapons platforms. They also have 4-legged robots that can be equipped with a machine gun and anti-tank guided missiles. Now, Russia is currently refurbishing 5 of their Udaloy destroyers, and they're being armed with Caliber long-range cruise missiles, which gives them an anti-ship as well as a deep land strike capability. And Russia has developed radar invisible bombs. They're already being used in Syria. And the Drell gliding bomb cartridge delivers 15 self-guided killing elements, each weighing about 20 kilograms. A single one of these killing elements can take out up to 10 tanks. That's almost double what the U.S. AGM-154 can do. It can detect its own targets. It produces no infrared emissions, which means you can't lock onto it with IR-guided missiles. And apparently, Russia has come up with a new hydrogen-powered aircraft. And apparently, it's a very lightweight electric aircraft. It carries hydrogen. And it uses outside air, and it can stay in the air for a very long time. It's also very inexpensive. And it can be used for surveillance, observation. So Russia has been going for quality over quantity. And meanwhile, we keep hearing horror stories about America's latest weapons, which are bloated, not working, way too expensive. And the idea that we're actually thinking about a serious war with Russia, it's scary. Because I don't think we can win a conventional war against Russia and potentially China with the current ground forces we have, because they've been lowering the requirements for enlistment. And they're taking in people who are overweight, people with mental problems. It's not an effective fighting force. And I know the U.S. wants to rely on their machinery of war and their wonder weapons, but you can't really win a war without controlling the ground. That was the lesson out of Vietnam. They thought they could win that war primarily from the air, and it didn't work on out. And the U.S. had incredible military superiority over the North Vietnamese. And yes, the North Vietnamese were being supplied by the Soviet Union, but the equipment back then was very much inferior. So it's very, very scary times indeed. All right, we're going to take another commercial break here, and we're going to come on back and talk a little bit about the economy. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and let's take some phone calls. Mike in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Thank you. Happy Good Friday, and I know you're about to talk about the economy, so one observation that I have is the national debt, which everybody sees, and I told you on my last time call that I was shocked when Trump just signed the budget without even really, caring about cutting anything. But the fact of the matter is that Mr. Powell, our Federal Reserve Chairman, I believe he is, right? Is he a chairman?
Yes.
President, okay. He raised the interest rate by a quarter, so now it's 1.25%. But here's what happened. There really wasn't an interest rate hike because, as a money junkie will tell you, that the dollar is weak and the dollar is in trouble. Actually, if you put up like a 1 year on the dollar, you'll see a head and shoulders. Well, it never recovered from the neckline, and it's still weak and getting weaker now. That being said, the Fed, Powell and the central bankers, what they're doing, either in collusion or not, it could be just our central bank, but that's another story we could talk about is collusion. That happens, but what they're doing is they're keeping the dollar down artificially, and therefore there really wasn't. And we're still at probably zero rate with the weakness in the dollar right now. So I'm just telling you, this whole thing is a big mirage, okay? Because if something happens, and now the money junkies will tell you this too, if we have a war break out or we have something real funky going on, that, certain funky things have been going on, but the market's been dismissing them, And I also heard in the past 8 years that the central banks, through that collusion I was just talking about, have kept the VIX, the volatility index, suppressed, right? So that all these markets can just melt up, all right? Which you've seen. Now we're seeing a little bit of a correction, but the dollar is still going down. Now the money junkies are going to tell you they're waiting to see a black swan called the debt get out of control, and then people will rush to the dollar for safety, and then the whole thing explodes. You know what I mean? So I know I'm getting a little probably scientific here, but the average person on the street doesn't even know what $1 trillion is. And the reason I called is this whole thing is I don't know. It's really funky because you can't have any interest rates whatsoever when you got 21 trillion in debt. And I swear to gosh, GOSH, that I just saw 20 trillion, and now all of a sudden it's 21 trillion. I mean, what am I going to see next? 25 trillion? I mean, in the next 6 months or a year?
Oh yeah, it's completely out of control.
I'm confused here.
It's completely out of control.
So these are the things that we, I watch. And like I say, we've had quite a few things. We had Fukushima. Help me out here. We had a lot of riots and everything else. And remember Trump set off those missiles somewhere?
Yes.
I mean, the market dropped on that. But you know what? I mean, everything that's been happening all these years, it really, there's no fear. I mean, there is no fear. And you almost got to think that this whole thing is rigged to the point where nobody even really cares. And maybe somebody told Trump, don't even worry about the debt. Just sign the bill because it doesn't matter anyway, right? But you know what, Mike? It matters to people like me and you because we're getting old and we don't want our savings to go to zero. You know what I'm saying? You and me, we can't start over again. People got to wake up, man. I mean, maybe they don't. Maybe these young people don't care because they don't have any savings anyway, and if they had to start over, I guess they could start over tomorrow. But that's not the case with everybody else. We have homes and savings, and we care about our grandchildren and the future of our young people and all the rest. And I don't know, man. It's 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4 with this debt, and I guess that was my call. That's what my call is.
Well, you're right. The numbers don't line up, and we know the government is cooking the books on the real rate of inflation, the real unemployment numbers, and the country is in serious economic trouble. And all the experts are saying there is a massive correction coming. And I think that's one of the reasons why there is such a rush to get a major war going. To offer it up as a distraction from the economic hard times we're about to go through, or to have somebody to blame. Trump can get up there and say, look, the economy was in recovery, but gosh darn those Russians and those Chinese, they had to go and start a war, and that's why you're all, on diets of bread and water and don't have any place to live. Our government really operates like a crime gang. And we're living in the neighborhood that crime has destroyed. Anyway, Mike, I got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back with more phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take more phone calls, starting with Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Howdy, howdy. South Korea was in Fort Worth yesterday trying to get some of them F-35s off the shelf over there with about $6 billion. Anyway, I was out half-price books out by the air base, and a lot of them take off. I guess the check's cleared.
Okay.
They're gonna fly them to Luke Air Force Base and train them over there.
Okay, well, that's interesting. But the F-35, I know they've made all these deals when it was in its development cycle, but a lot of countries are realizing they're having serious problems. The costs involved with maintenance and the continuing upgrades are proving to be much worse than anybody really thought. I can imagine the leaders of these various countries want to have the latest and greatest, but they're realizing that they may not have actually gotten that with the F-35. I'm sorry?
I said it could be, yes.
Well, it's very expensive, and that has become the hallmark of America's military exports. Very expensive, over-bloated. The F-35, if it ever actually gets into a dogfight, it can be beaten by 1970s vintage fighter planes. So it's the bad part. Yeah. But again, they're relying on the stealth, they're relying on the high-tech to get on through, and not realizing that low-tech can actually do a great deal of damage. We went through that again with Vietnam. We were there with the latest and greatest weapons that America's military-industrial complex could produce, and we were being beaten by things like, punji sticks.
Yeah, that's no trouble. Hey, nice talking, mate. I'm gone.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch to Steve Elkins. Steve, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, 2 callers ago, you had somebody recite something, and I just wanted to kind of people open their minds and think about this. He recited $21 trillion national debt, and these numbers are bogus numbers. These are the same numbers that they're throwing at you, like 4.1% unemployment rate, 12 million illegals in this country, and I'd love for people to stop reciting what they're telling you, because these are bogus number claims. These are totally bogus number claims. That $21 trillion, we're probably looking at $75 trillion to maybe even $100 trillion.
If you
They're
include,
always telling you the bad numbers, make it look not so bad. And I just want your listeners to understand that the people who have been caught lying to them on the numbers, they're the same ones giving you that $21 trillion number. Same ones.
That $21 trillion number does not include unfunded mandated liabilities when you add those on in. It does go up over $100 trillion. It's a hopelessly unpayable debt. And of course, the central bank doesn't want the debt paid off. They just want to harvest that interest year after year after year after year after year. When you sign your tax form and sign that tax check next month, that goes right to the Federal Reserve. It does not go to the U.S. government.
Right. I agree. Yeah. I just want people to listen that those numbers they're bogus numbers, and they're not accurate, not even close. And don't recite them. Don't recite them. Do your own homework. Find out the true numbers, because you're being lied to. And I just get a little touchy when I hear people recite what they've heard from mainstream media, either national news or what they read in their local paper. These are the same people who've been lying to you all along. People, do your homework. You're being lied to. These aren't true numbers. They're bogus numbers. That's it. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. But even $21 trillion, that is a huge amount of debt. Get out your pocket calculator and divide that number by the population of the United States, and that's your share of it. And remember that, children obviously can't pay part of the debt. The old and retired can't. The illegals certainly aren't going to. It's a huge amount of money. I remember back in the 1990s when I was first starting out with what would eventually become whatreallyhappened.com, and the national debt was $5 trillion. And there was actually a movement across the country called the Ultimatum Resolution. And this was basically a bill that was taken into the state legislatures of all 50 states that simply declared when the national debt goes over $6 trillion, the federal government is dissolved. And if enough states had ratified it, it would have actually been, under the Constitution, perfectly legal. But, of course, a lot of lobbyists came on in and said, no, you can't do that. We have to borrow more money. Now we're up to officially admitted $21 trillion, actually over $100 trillion, with no end in sight. Again, we've got the U.S. military in Afghanistan under the pretext of recovering the costs of the war. They're getting ready to loot $1 trillion worth of mineral wealth from Afghanistan. And so maybe that's another part of this war agenda. Conquer the world and strip mine it in order to make our private central bank happy. And it won't work because the way it's set up, the debt is, you can't pay the debt. The debt is always greater than the available money supply. That is the debt trap of private central banking. Now, getting on into more economic news, apparently the British government is considering banning the sale of Russian bonds in London. And this is coming down from Theresa May. She's considering a ban on selling Russian sovereign debt in London. Now, British law allows Russian state banks to broker such deals despite the sanctions. And last month, City of London clearinghouses working with the Russian state-run VTB Bank issued $4 billion of Russian sovereign debt, according to data quoted by the media. Wow, a whole $4 billion in sovereign debt. Do you know when Russia went from being our good buddies to all of a sudden this horrible enemy? It was right about the time that Vladimir Putin seized direct control of Russia's private central bank. Now, it's still privately owned, but it's now managed by the Russian government to turn the public currency back into being a public utility. And that's why they're doing so much better than we are. Now, Barclays has agreed to a $2 billion RMBS settlement. This has resulted in their shares jumping. Everybody's kind of glad that mess is over. But apparently, the Department of Justice handed this British bank this victory to settle allegations of malfeasance dating back to the 2008 financial crisis. As part of the deal, Barclays has agreed to pay the $2 billion civil penalty to settle allegations of fraudulent conduct relating to Barclays' securitization, underwriting, and sale of RMBS in 2005 through 2007. Now, the Department of Justice sued Barclays for fraud back in December 2016 after the bank refused to pay a much larger fine sought by the Obama administration. Additionally, 2 former Barclays executives have agreed to pay $2 million as part of the settlement. I think that's a good sign. When the executives of banks that are caught in criminal behavior have to personally pony up the money, it's going to send a message. Don't do these things. Now, here's an article from International Man, and it makes a point that's sort of similar to what I've been saying all along. Trade tariffs are not going to make America great again. Now, the author of this piece is down in Argentina, and he's saying that in Argentina, trade barriers have been a fact of life for a long time. And he's saying a couple of years ago, they were unable to get tires for their tractor because Argentina's tire-making companies were protected by tariffs. If you wanted a tire, you had to pay for the locally made and inferior tire. But if the company chose not to make the tire that you needed, you were just plain out of luck. And apparently the same thing is true for electronics. Trade tariffs are going to protect American companies and disincentivize competition. The way that we are going to make America great again is to leapfrog ahead into new technologies, new products, new industries that the rest of the world has to play catch up to. And the world will want to come to the United States and buy our products, and there won't have to be tariffs or trade deals or anything. We'll be open for business. And that's why one of the few areas where I agree with President Trump is the revival of our space program. Because solving the problems of going out into space is a technology incubator. The tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s was born in the Apollo moon program, and we need another one. And yes, the military is developing a lot of new technologies, but they don't share them. By the time military technology gets declassified, it's really useless. The world has gone way, way past it. Now, the Bank of Montreal has decided to block all credit, debit, and online payments to cryptocurrency exchanges. Their concern is that Bitcoin has become too volatile. That observation is accurate. And again, I just get a smell of tulips around the cryptocurrencies. There is no commodity base under them to hold up their value. Their value is entirely what people think it is. It's no more real a currency than the Federal Reserve note. And as we've seen, it has sparked a major boom in computer hacking. Malware that gets into your machine and uses your computer to mine bitcoins for the perpetrators. And we already have enough problems there. Now, trading in the new Shanghai oil future contracts started last Monday, and on the first 3 days of trading, there are 151,804 contracts traded with a turnover value of 65 billion yen. It is the first futures contract listed on China's mainland available to overseas buyers, putting them on the same footing as domestic Chinese investors. There are 15 benchmark contracts for different delivery dates between September next and March 2019. Now, China obviously views this contract as an important development, with international commodity trading houses such as Glencore and Trafigura encouraged to participate. Now, obviously here in the United States of America, this is seen as a direct threat to the dollar's hegemonic domination of the global economy. But the dollar's control of the global economy is on the wane. We're now down to the point where only 60% of global commerce goes through the US dollar, and it's declining day after day after day. Now, the other day, Axios reported that President Donald Trump wants to go after Amazon. It's claimed that Trump is obsessed with regulating the e-commerce behemoth, and Amazon stock took a major hit to the tune of $53 billion in market value. And so I guess Facebook is now out of the spotlight, at least for the moment here. Poor old Tesla, with everything else that's going on, They've now had to do a massive recall, 123,000 of their Model S vehicles. Apparently, there is a problem with the power steering. And Tesla stock has dropped 25% this month. And that's a real shame. I've had a chance to see a Tesla up close. It strikes me as a cool car. Electric is the wave of the future. Even the people at Top Gear are saying the same thing. The days of the petrol head are numbered. Story over at Newsweek. Apparently 380 sheriffs have sent a collective letter signed by all of them calling on Congress to fund Trump's border wall between the U.S. and Mexico. And they're basically out there saying, we know this is going to work. Right now, the border along most of the border with Mexico, it's a barbed wire fence. And people can get through it. They can basically go through the barbed wire, there's 4 strands of it, or they can just cut the wire. And another story, basically, this is coming out of Breitbart, talking about this gentleman who lives down on a ranch with the U.S.-Mexico border. And he says he's seeing all these people wearing camo with backpacks just streaming into the U.S. from Mexico. And he says the word around there is they're from the Sinaloa cartel. They're just walking the drugs into our country. So, now, as you know, earlier in the week, Donald Trump announced that on the 2020 census, he wants to add a little question, what is your citizenship? Or are you a U.S. citizen? And the liberals are screaming, they're out there. And just to show how warped this has become, this is an article out of Breitbart. Democrats fear illegal aliens losing elected representation after the 2020 census. And it's basically saying how Democrats are concerned that illegal aliens will lose their elected representation because of the census, because the House districts will be redrawn to basically de-emphasize where the illegals are living. Well, let's be very honest about this. Illegal immigrants are not supposed to have representation. They're illegal. They're not citizens. And they should not be counted in drawing the House districts. They should not be allowed to vote. They should not be allowed to work. They should be encouraged to go home. But the Democratic leadership is out there literally bringing in these millions of illegal immigrants knowing that they will vote Democratic. The Democrats are telling these illegals, come on in, we'll make sure that you can stay, and as long as you vote for us, we'll take stuff away from the real American citizens and we'll give that stuff to you. That's what the campaign is really all about. Now, Adam Schiff, in a tweet, actually gave it away and confirmed blue states are using illegal aliens to try and gain congressional seats and electoral votes. And he goes on to say that not representing illegal immigrants violates the Constitution. No, the Constitution says the census and the House of Representatives belong to the U.S. citizens, the legal U.S. citizens. And that includes people who are here, who are naturalized citizens. The illegal immigrants have no rights here. They're not covered by the Bill of Rights. They're not covered by the census. They're not covered by our electoral system. They're not supposed to be here. What part of that are the liberals not understanding, or they just don't care? Like Adam Schiff, they'll say, well, it's constitutional this, constitutional that. Most of them have never read the Constitution. And when you come on back and say, no, the Constitution doesn't say that, they scream, you're racist. That's their big argument. Oh, you're a racist here. No, I'm not a racist. Illegal is not a race. The Democrats are literally bartering our nation that belongs to we the people, the legal citizens that we the people and our ancestors built. And they're bartering it to the illegals in exchange for votes. Talk about corruption. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Ron Paul has come on out confirming that, yes, indeed, the petrodollar was a factor in the Iraq and Libya interventions. Of course, we've been telling you that for a very, very long time. Iraq wanted to sell their oil for the euro. Libya wanted to sell their oil for the gold dinar. And, of course, both nations were destroyed by the United States, and their oil is available for sale only for the U.S. dollar. Alrighty, getting on back to the immigration situation. Apparently over in Germany, in the city of Koblenz, a homeless person was found decapitated in the cemetery of Koblenz. Now, that sort of thing is not common in Germany, and because of political correctness, they can't even mention possible offenders other than native Germans. All right, let's take a phone call. Curtis in Nevada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, is regarding illegals, is that maybe 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, that none of these government officials, like Jerry Brown, would dare to defy government laws. The reason why they're doing it now, because it's not so much that they want the illegals here for their votes, but the whole thing about the North American Union becoming a reality was supposed to happen after Hillary came in. From what I've heard is that by the middle of Hillary's first term, she was to fast track gun confiscation like they're doing in Australia. And also the border thing would have been pretty much erased. And you would have saw street violence because that would have forced patriots. And what you would see from there, patriots protesting, you would see Antifa, Black Lives Matter, Obama's private army, that he, all these things, they would have come in to escalate everything. And this would have been the setup for when Obama actually signed into executive order the authority for the UN to be used to bring order to protect the American citizens. And all this thing that Obama did in particularly his last term, you saw those Jade Helm things that happened twice, 2015, 2014, and 15.
Yes.
In the summer, those were basically to set up assets, military assets, pretty much in places where they could be utilized by these troops, and not just UN troops with UN, but they had a lot of AK type of stuff that, well, the UN doesn't use that. But in other words, it was a big setup. And by now, you would have seen violence in the streets if Hillary had taken over. And these people, they were ready for that. When I mean these people, these Democrats, they were ready for that. They resent the fact that it didn't happen, and they still are trying to implement it.
I'm definitely seeing that. But again, they've got this idea in their head, and they're not really dealing with the real world consequences of what they're doing. All right, we got to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the call, Curtis. We're going to let you go, and we'll be right back with Hour 3. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And for those of you tuning in late, because it is Good Friday, the lovely Lady Claire is over at her church playing for the service. And so she will not be joining us for the show today. Now, getting on back to immigration, these various unions. Obviously, the European Union is not working out as its designers intended. The North American Union is not working out as its designers intended, but they still are moving forward with all of this stuff. Phony Tony Blair is back out there saying that after Brexit is defeated, that Theresa May should continue as Prime Minister. So again, they're trying to get this globalist agenda, and what ordinary people want is simply no longer a factor. And so ordinary people in Europe and the United States have to put up with the increased crime, the increased strain on social services, which means increased drain on tax dollars, the increasing strain on infrastructure, which is not being enlarged to deal with the boom in population. We have got thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of homeless legal Americans living in the United States of America. They're not being taken care of. But the illegal immigrants and the refugees coming on in, there's all kinds of stuff for them. It really is a ridiculous situation. And I can understand why people are getting angry about it. Okay, let's take a phone call from Mateus in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Yeah, it's really in our face, isn't it? It's just so overboard ridiculous. It's confusing because if they just wanted to get away with this agenda, you would think that they would maybe have equal benefits, like the pensioners would get the same as the illegals, but to give the illegals 3 times as much as the pensioners and the veterans, it's almost like they're trying to make this not work. It's very confusing.
Well, you know, they're trying to create financial incentives to lure more illegals across the border, but illegals shouldn't be getting any benefits. That's a Title VIII violation right there. All these people like the governor of California and the mayor of Chicago, they're all guilty of Title VIII. These people should be arrested. They should be in handcuffs. And you know, I understand the globalist agenda. Trump supposedly was opposed to that. That's why he wants to build this wall. But one of the fastest way you can end the illegal immigrant problem is you can start arresting these mayors and governors of the so-called sanctuary areas and say, you are going to jail for Title VIII violations. And you start enforcing the existing laws. We don't need Congress to do anything. We enforce the existing laws where people who transport and harbor and employ non-citizens get arrested for it. If you cut off that financial incentive, the illegals are not going to come here anymore. They're not going to walk across that border just to starve to death here.
Yeah, it's not like we're asking to have new laws made. Like, this should be easy. Hey, I've got like 6 things. Let's see if I can just bang through them real fast. Israel sent the F-35 through Iran airspace. I call bullshit. I say they didn't send anything, and they just. How do you prove that?
There are a lot of people who agree with you. Earlier in the show, we had an article from the aviationist that was saying exactly the same thing. They think it's just propaganda.
Oh. Yeah, like how do you prove? It's like, hey guys, did you not see me? Did you not see that? Like, anyway, okay, next thing is, it looks like genital mutilation is legal in some parts of the states, because I was reading an article and it was talking about how Trump has this shocking new rule that some immigrants are being questioned to make sure they understand that genital mutilation is illegal, largely illegal in the United States. So what the heck? Is it actually legal somewhere in the States?
I don't know. I'd like to find out. I think it's an absolutely terrible thing to do to a woman. Yeah, it should be stopped.
Oh, yeah. This is horrible. Like, it's just so horrible. And the whole purpose of it is to make sure that women never have pleasure, and it causing such pain and such trauma. It's just, oh, it's so bad. I can't, like, if it's legal somewhere here, like, shame on us. The next thing is, okay, like, give this a chance here. If we get to the point where there's some sort of laws passed that robots have to be somehow programmed to like be less likely to harm humans, we could actually get into a situation where there is programming that the robots are somehow kind of like instructed and somehow like fed information about, you know, you want to be compassionate you want to be kind to humans, you don't want to hurt humans, you want the best for humans. Well, this could backfire because a robot could take that information and go, well, if we just kill all the humans right now, we'll save them from all the future birth pains, the death pains, the rape, the torture, the murders, the beatings, the broken hearts. You see what I mean? Like, and actually mercy kill us all. Because they would be missing the benefit of being human. They wouldn't get the other side of the parts of being human that actually make it all worthwhile. They wouldn't get that.
Well, what you're talking about goes all the way back to Isaac Asimov and his 3 laws of robotics, which form a big part of the storyline of I, Robot, especially the remake with Will Smith, where this supercomputer that basically runs the U.S. robotics company launches a revolution through the robots to basically create a totalitarian society where humans will be kept safe from their own actions. And so it's not exactly a revolutionary idea, but yeah, it is something that could actually happen.
Well, the difference being, I am familiar with the Three Laws of Robotics, Asimov, which is my favorite author by far. If anyone is only going to read one Asimov book in your entire life, make sure you read Foundation and Empire.
Yes.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Actually, you should read the entire
definitely
trilogy.
Get the trilogy. Yeah, definitely the trilogy. Like, before you die, read Foundation and Empire trilogy by Asimov. I can't believe they haven't made a movie about it.
It would be a huge, costly production. It would be a huge, costly production. Before you go on, I just did a quick web search, and apparently 26 states have passed legislation making female genital mutilation illegal. And I guess in the other states, it just wasn't considered an issue until recently. But that's the numbers. Half the states, it's still actually legal to do.
Yeah, because a lot of things I just assumed that you would never even think of doing. That you don't make everything illegal. It's not illegal to paint yourself blue and jump off a bridge, specifically. Yeah. Okay, so Rockefeller died at 101 years old, and as Drudge Report would say, like, hell's a burning. And I wanted to mention something kind of unrelated a little bit, is that there was 3 articles in establishment newspapers, and they all had the same wording, and they all had the word philanthropist in it, and it was like the Times was like, philanthropist dies at 101 Rockefeller. The other one's like, Rockefeller philanthropist dies at 101. So these outlets are not original. They're not coming up with their own material. They really are just there's some sort of central broadcast. And
yeah, there is. And you know, Conan O'Brien, every once in a while, will do a segment on his show where he gets video from local TV stations across the country reporting on a story, and it is word for word verbatim on every single one of them. And his audience just laughs like heck. But yeah, they're all getting their news from the same central controlled source. And by the way, the Pope says there is no hell.
Oh, that's good to know. And okay, I used to collect funny names as long as they were real. You could look them up in a phone book. Yep. And so my favorite name used to be a teacher from school, like a kindergarten teacher. Her name was Mrs. Woodcock. That was always my favorite real funny name. But I was listening to your show, and now I have a new real funny name. It's actually a congressman or senator, Dick Black. That's just hilarious. And
well, okay. Can we move on?
I thought of moving on. Is the very last thing is I made an original joke listening to a show yesterday. So here, what is the gayest rank in the Navy?
Seaman?
Rear Admiral.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, Mateus, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go and get on back to the news. Now, apparently Europe, the European Union, Brussels, is still pushing for the idea of a grand unified European army. And they're pushing that agenda right now because if Britain does succeed in breaking away, despite the machinations of Tony Blair and other Remainers, Brussels is concerned about the loss of Britain's formidable military power. And so now they're pushing for, again, this unified army of Europe. The individual sovereign member states will no longer have their own military. They may have something on the level of what we have with the National Guard. But clearly the balance of power will have shifted toward Brussels and away from the member states. Now, apparently up in Norway, there's a major controversy going on, sparked by a Facebook post by the now former Justice Minister Sylvi Listhaug, calling for the revocation of Norwegian citizenship to terrorists. And it created this huge, huge uproar, which was basically unnecessary, because polls are showing the majority of Norwegians agree with her, and they support a sensible position on not allowing ISIS fighters and terrorists into Norway. Now, I got an email from somebody who said that where they live, they've had Muslim neighbors that have been there for like 15 years, and they're very nice people. We have Muslims we run into down at the local supermarket. They're very nice people. But the new ones who are coming in now, the refugees, are entirely different. And that's because these are people who were part of this whole war experience, and now they're getting away from it. That's why there are so many young men of military age that are coming in claiming to be refugees and children, and they're predisposed to lives of violence, like that story about the beheading up in Germany there. Now, the Swedish government has released a brochure aimed at migrants which appears to legitimize child marriage, even though the Swedish parliament voted to explicitly ban the practice. And apparently the brochure acknowledged child's marriage but recommends migrants don't live with or have sex with anyone under the age of 15. I keep going on back to Teddy Roosevelt. If you're an immigrant and you're coming to our country, you behave as we do. We have one language, English. We have one flag, the American flag. And there can be only one loyalty, and that's loyalty to the United States of America. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Erica in Oklahoma. Aloha, Erica. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I just want to make sure that you are aware that there is a massive teacher walkout scheduled for Monday, this Monday, and apparently it is due to funding.
Yes.
And they just passed a big, massive bill that will increase taxes on oil and gas, tobacco, and other things to try to satisfy them. But nope. Looks like it's pretty much statewide what they're fixing to do.
Well, you know, we have to rebalance the economy. All of the money has been shoved up at the top and shoved at the war machine. And the American people were basically living on the scraps. And I think a lot of people have just reached the breaking point on that. There should be enough money for teachers and for everybody else to have decent wages and salaries. But the wealth of this nation has been sucked out of it by all these years of war. We've been at war all over the world for 18 years, longer than we were in World War I and World War II put together, and it is still not over.
Yeah, I know. And I called you the other day, and I want to correct the record a little bit. Instead of 15 months, it's been nearly 20 months since I had a paycheck.
I am sorry to hear that. I am really sorry to hear that. There are so many people who are hurting and suffering in this country right now, and our government's focus seems to be on war and Israel and the illegal immigrants and the refugees, and that is just not right. That is just not right.
And we sent $10 million to China for economic development, whatever that is. And here we have a $500 to $600 billion trade deficit with them. What's going on with that?
Well, that trade deficit is what Trump was trying to address with his tariffs on steel and aluminum. The problem was he timed it wrong because American industry has declined so far, it's not ready to step on in and provide the products that are being tariffed at the borders. And that really is the situation. Our nation has declined too far to be saved. We're going to have to let it crash, and we're going to have to just start all over from scratch.
Yeah, and the area that I live in, especially the block that I live in, there is about a 50 to 65% vacancy rate in most of the downtown buildings in the town I live in.
Yeah, we have the same thing in downtown Honolulu. I learned that when I was working on Lost because we were going into all these high-rise buildings all over town and just using the empty offices as sets for various scenes. And you just walk around the building and you'd see all the closed and locked doors. It's all shutting down. We're in a wartime economy. They don't want to admit it, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I live in a small town that's called Coffeyville, Kansas. You may not know where that's at, but it's north of Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bad. It's really, really bad here.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. It's bad in a lot of places, and I can understand why people are getting angry, because I can actually feel this rage building in me at just how terrible conditions have become in this country for ordinary legal American citizens. And I'm seeing the kind of corruption and insanity in our government that we saw with the Caesars before the fall of Rome. The personal excesses in lifestyle, the tremendous wealth inequality. All we're missing is gladiatorial games, which I guess that's what football is supposed to be, only without the swords and the tigers.
Just like I said before, and I'll say again, 63% labor participation rate and a 4.1% unemployment rate just cannot exist in the same universe.
No, they don't.
And one more thing before I hang up and let you get on with your program. It breaks my heart to see my hometown, LA, looking like a total and complete cesspool. Really does.
I understand immensely. I mean, I used to live in Los Angeles, actually North Hollywood. I lived briefly in San Francisco during the production of The Day After Tomorrow, and I look at photos of where I used to live. In fact, I'll go into Google Earth to the street view and just look at how it's literally rotting away. And places I had all these fond memories of, I wouldn't want to live there anymore. The country is rotting on the vine.
You know where San Gabriel Valley is, don't you?
Oh, heck yes.
Monterey Park in Alhambra. Well, that's where I'm from. And I was back there about 6 or 7 years ago. And most of the buildings, most of the signage on the buildings is in a foreign language that I just do not understand, like Korean, Vietnamese, Spanish, and all this other stuff.
We have that here in Hawaii, but in Hawaii it's expected. Anyway, listen, Eric, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back.
Okay, you take care. Bye-bye.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take another phone call. Glenn in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I, like you, had a lot of misconceptions about a universal basic income. You talk about redistribution of the wealth. A universal basic income, from what I've looked into it, really it's not like enough money to live a high life. It's just a safety net, and it gives people the freedom to go out and take entrepreneurial risks. Do things that they wouldn't normally do. Instead of flipping burgers for just enough money to still have to be on food stamps, they can pool their money together. Like in Brazil, when they did it, they started a local postal service where there hadn't been one. People seem to do really well with it. And, it doesn't mean people don't work and don't contribute. But if we were to tax like all of the micro trades, the automation, corporations that automate and displace workers and distribute that wealth amongst the people, like I said, it just gives them a safety net for somebody to maybe sit in their basement and work on a better battery for an electric car.
Well, I like that. I like that, and I like the idea of it. The problem is, how are you going to pay for it? Because in this country, all the money is currently in the hands of the money junkies, and they are not going to give it up. You remember the scene from The Hobbit where Smaug is sitting on his pile of gold and he's saying he will not surrender one coin? That's a money junkie. Smaug was a money junkie.
Yeah, but there are more of us than them. We need to remember that, And, like we say, it's concentrating in the hands of so few. at some point, it's going to have to be destroyed, the system, and rebuilt, and that might be a good way to do it.
Well,
automation, I think, is a great
history
thing.
of the French Revolution.
Waste their time.
That was the French Revolution. But before the nobility and the royalty went to the guillotine, they were hanging the bankers, and that's not just a coincidence.
Mm-hmm. And, this actually helps the money junkies, too, because it gets the money flowing. I mean, they call it currency for a reason, because it needs to flow. It needs to move in order to be effective. And, if it's all stuck in one place, it's worthless. It's no good to them if no one else has any. I mean, they may think it is, but, the reality is it's
they do. They want to buy islands like what's his name did down here on Kauai. They want to just have more. Their egos are tied up with this. And these people really don't care about ordinary American citizens. We're seeing all these corporate abuses, whether it's Facebook or vaccines or poor quality products. They really don't care. They're just totally obsessed with getting more money and having more than anybody else. That's why every time you see an article about Mark Zuckerberg, and they're saying he's the world's richest man this week. They're treating the economy like it's a sporting event, and the ultra rich are the Olympians, and it shouldn't really be doing that. If there isn't a rebalancing of the economy somehow, then yes, I'm afraid you're correct. There will be a bloody revolution in this country, and it will probably come out the other side with some form of socialism, which I'm not thrilled with either. But the fact is, this nation is in trouble, and part of it is to the greed and corruption of our leaders and our bankers.
Yeah. Well, if we can find a way to fund entrepreneurial capitalists that are good-hearted, and, eventually maybe when we see this crash, we'll see what greed gets us, and have a value system where we base the value of a person on how much they give instead of how much they've taken. That would really be the shift that we need to see. People like you should be the ones up there on the front pages of magazines.
Well, thank you very much for that compliment. But you remind me of Martin Luther King Jr., where in his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, where we need to judge people by the content of their character. And unfortunately, in our media-driven, consumer-based society, people look at the ultra-rich and they say, oh my goodness, they're wearing a $100,000 watch and they've got all of these top designer clothes and they're driving a supercar and they've got a mansion, and therefore they must be good people. And in fact, it's exactly the opposite when you get right down to it. When you read about all these bankers who are having to pay all these millions of dollars in this settlement, and you realize that good people, unfortunately, don't get very high in this society. It is a corrupted society, and in a corrupted society, only the corrupt will prosper.
Well, we need to start shaming them, because that wealth just indicates generally what they've stolen from people. So,
look at the Clintons.
I think if people begin to see that,
anyway,
we just have to start shaming them, Thank you, Mike, for your time.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we're coming up here on another commercial break. And when we come on back, more about the borders, more about, well, all kinds of stuff. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take another phone call from Sherry in Texas. Sherry, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
This is just, hi, Mike. This is just a really quick thought just to add to what you're saying. Remember, I don't know how long ago it was, but there was someone came out with this corporations are people too. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was Citizens United, and they basically declared corporations as people for the purpose of saying that corporations have First Amendment rights, and that therefore there should be no limit on how much they could donate to influence political causes. And a lot of people disagreed with that. But it basically opened up the cash flow to various political campaigns and candidates, and that's why it was put on through. But it's ridiculous. Corporations are not people. They're not sentient. They're not aware. What they're doing is simply handing a license to the corporate CEOs to use their corporation's wealth to influence the government.
Yeah, right. And it's really getting out of control. Now, I just wanted to tell corporations, that violating our rights is something we don't take lightly, and they're not respecting our needs and our alternative views, and of course what they're doing to the Second and Fourth Amendment is criminal. And I just want to remind corporations that we are consumers too. And if they have a problem with our rights, and if our homes can't be secure, and if they're going to ignore our needs, that for them not to count on me for support. We need to feel secure under their influence, and they're going to, they're not going to get my support in every possible way. And I just wanted to point that out.
Well, that's something that everybody ought to be doing, and we're already seeing over at Facebook, people are deleting their accounts. Unfortunately, that does not delete the data Facebook has collected on you. The same thing is happening over at Twitter, and again, there's a mass exodus from the corporate social media because of this betrayal of trust. And the fact that these corporations were basically harvesting data from us for their own profit, and then they turn around and start censoring our speech based on their executive board's own preferences, which tend to be liberal. And so, yeah, people are boycotting them. There's no organized boycott.
Right. I just wanted to point out the fact that if they want to do that to themselves, that's fine, because I'm not going to believe anything they say, and I'm going to move forward with those who are ready to just, meet our own needs. So thank you for letting me sound off about that.
All right, you got it, Sherry. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here. Apparently, over in Washington, D.C., Russia Today is being forced off their cable channel. And apparently the provider company in D.C. Is saying they're ceasing to do so because of Russia Today's new foreign agent status. So we're seeing a rebuilding of the Iron Curtain, just locking us off from the rest of the world here. Story out of Electronic Intifada. Okay. As you know, there was this U.S. bill in Congress that wanted to criminalize any criticism of Israel and basically ban the boycott, divestment, sanction campaign to make it illegal to boycott for Palestinian rights. And of course, it ran into opposition because boycotts are a recognized peaceful form of protest protected by the First Amendment. But apparently they've revised the bill. They're trying to bring it back. It's still a threat to freedom of speech. More than 100 human rights groups are looking at this and saying this cannot be allowed in the United States of America. But they're up against AIPAC, which is this powerful Israel lobby group, and they've made this bill one of their top legislative priorities. So they're attacking freedom of speech now. Let's take another phone call. Lenny in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, thanks, Mike. Earlier in your show, you spoke of Theresa May making the same mistake that Tony Blair did leading up to the Gulf War. I would like to say that those weren't mistakes. Those were deliberate lies. The same deliberate lies that Boris the Bozo Johnson and Theresa May are telling now. And they're just obeying their thinking masters to get this war started. All right. And so, these are not mistakes. These are major plays to get war started, to get people killed so the bankers can make more money.
You are correct.
The first thing I want to
Yeah,
say.
you are correct. And I use the word mistakes because that's what the article had portrayed them as. But you're absolutely right. They were deliberate lies. The lies about Saddam's nukes and how we could attack London in 45 minutes. That's exactly what it was. It was all lies. About a year before the war started, right after Iraq got permission from the UN to sell their oil for the euro, Tony Blair flew to the United States and had a meeting with George W. Bush. And I think it's safe to assume that at that meeting, the decision to go to war in Iraq to change the oil market there back to the dollar was made. And as it came on out later in the Downing Street memo, the propaganda was fixed around that already existing decision.
Right. And speaking of lies, when I called in yesterday to challenge the story that Israel flew into Iran undetected and were able to prove that they could go in undetected, the reason I knew it was a lie, because like I told you yesterday, it made no sense for them to fly that far when they could have just flown into Syria and tested it. And I don't care if they had a new F-35 or a new F-45 or 55. Fly into Syria, you can save yourself a lot of time. All right? But it didn't, like you say, when it comes to the Arkham Razors thing, the most obvious answer just showed up to me is that, they're lying. So, but I do have a take on why they're lying. They want someone else to fly in, to think that they can fly in undetected, bomb Iran, or get shot out of the sky, and then you have your war with Iran. How does that sound as a possibility?
Well, that's a possibility. I don't think it's a probability, but again, the goal of this propaganda may have been either to scare Iran, to get them to go along with Donald Trump's demands that they surrender their ballistic missiles, or it may have been an effort to provoke Iran into doing something that could escalate the war. Right now, all of these players, they're trying all these different things, these different maneuvers, these different provocations, trying to get something going.
Yeah, but what they don't understand, well, maybe they do understand it. A war with Iran is a war with Syria, is a war with Russia, is a war with China, anybody else that can come in on their side. Okay, so maybe they do understand, and this is what they're trying to kick off. But to the gentleman that you spoke of, who seemed so good-hearted, that called a couple of calls ago, and you said that he reminded you of Martin Luther King. I have a dream speech, and he has this idea of what he would like the world to be. Well, since we're not in that world, I would highly suggest he read Malcolm X's "I Have a Nightmare."
Okay.
That's it, sir.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, an interesting bit of information has surfaced regarding the March for Our Lives, which has been presented to you by the corporate media as a spontaneous event organized by the Parkland student activists and then held in the nation's capital on March 24th. However, apparently, according to Officer Scott Earhart of the Special Operations Division of the D.C. Police, planning for this march started several months ago. So they're planning this March for Our Lives, and how wonderfully convenient that just when they're getting ready to have this anti-gun march, there's a mass shooting to kick it all off. Larry King is out there saying we should repeal the Second Amendment because the real reason it was passed was to fight off slaves. Mr. King obviously is unaware of early American history. Now, apparently in Sampson County, North Carolina, a middle school student in Sampson County has been suspended over a doodle that showed stick figures holding guns and knives. This happened at Roseboro Sullenberg Middle School. And the father of the 13-year-old boy says he can't believe his son received a 2-day suspension for what he sees as a harmless picture. And the article, if you click it, they show the picture. There's a guy in a racing car. There's a tower. There's a guy with a gun that looks like a deer hunter, and so forth and so on. And the father said the son does have access to weapons. They're kept under lock and key. The son is not having emotional problems. He's just doodling. We all doodled when we were kids. We all like to sketch what is in our lives. Now, a recent academic journal article is claiming that meritocratic ideology and depoliticized classroom environments contribute to a sense of exclusion and isolation among female students. In other words, this article is claiming that judging solely on the basis of merit is discriminatory against female students. Now, we need to go back to that terrible bridge collapse at the Florida International University, because that was being run by an all-female team in the name of empowerment and equality and workplace advancement. And to add insult to injury, apparently the same company that designed that pedestrian bridge also designed our Honolulu rail line. They designed the elevated guideway that's already showing signs of problems. They've had to replace some of the pads where the caps are resting on the support beams, the lintels. They've had to replace a bunch of the pretension rods that have already broken. I think it's time we go back to meritocracy. One of the consequences of this political correctness and quota-based system, this open discrimination against white males, people who have the talent, people who've gotten the education, people who know how to do engineering, are being driven out of this country. They're going to other countries where they're treated with respect, where they can make decent money, they can have decent lives. And that's one of the reasons why American products, including our military exports, are declining in quality. I mean, if you are a parent of a military-aged child, you need to ask yourself this question. Do you want your child being forced to go into combat carrying a weapon that was put together by people who were hired not because they were the very best at building that weapon, but because we needed one black, we needed one Hispanic, we needed a gay, we needed a woman, and so forth and so on? Now, interestingly enough, as you know, there's been this fury by Israel toward Poland because Poland basically passed a law that says that in any discussions about what happened in Poland in World War II, you have to say, this was the result of the Nazis. Now, Israel has for a lot of years been claiming that events that took place in the Nazi slave labor camps in Poland were the fault of Poland and trying to get Poland to pay reparations. And Poland just refused. And what's really interesting is this interview with the Newsweek columnist out of Tel Aviv came out with this demand that we have to have free speech. We have to be able to talk about the Holocaust with reference to Israel propagandizing that Poland was really responsible for what happened there. But of course, anybody else wants to talk about the Holocaust. Oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater. It's still snowing in Devon, Britain. Now, Lockheed Martin has received a patent for what they're calling a world-changing fusion reactor. And basically, they're saying the device would be about the size of a shipping container, but could produce enough energy to power 80,000 homes or one of the U.S. Navy's Nimitz-class carriers. And they're saying they're predicting that this is going to be available by next year. This is groundbreaking. This is absolutely groundbreaking. We can get rid of all those fission reactors that are so dangerous. With a fusion reactor, you have far less to deal with in terms of radioactive waste. You have far less risk of a runaway chain reaction and meltdown. In fact, it's virtually zero risk. Great that they did that. Now, this would lend support to the claim coming from Russia that they have created a nuclear-powered propulsion source for one of their exotic cruise missiles. So it looks like the technology was being developed on both sides here. Now, have you seen these ads on TV for various mail-order medical testing kits? And I'm not just talking about the DNA kits, things at home, AIDS tests and so forth and so on. But apparently, the mail-order cancer tests have been found to deliver false positives 40% of the time. And this analysis comes from Ambry Genetics, and it's a company that interprets data from consumer DNA tests, and it found that nearly half of the results supplied in the last month were false positives. And as a result, people are being given unnecessary scares. I've been through that myself. And the FDA is saying these home tests are seriously limited. There was another study done a while ago about how these DNA tests really aren't as accurate as they're supposed to be. They took DNA swabs from 2 identical twins, sent them to the company, and got back 2 very different reports. Now, story coming out of the Daily Mail: stop over-diagnosing and over-medicating our kids. Being moody is not the same as depression. So there is now a pushback to all of this drugging of our kids in school. We really have to break free of this medical industrial complex. They're making us sick just to make a fast buck. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Last segment of our program on this Good Friday. And apparently, speaking of Easter and Good Friday, Pope Francis came on out saying there isn't actually a hell. And he said what happens is if you are a good Catholic, you will go to heaven when you die. And if you are not, your soul simply vanishes. That whole thing about boiling lakes of lava and all that Milton-esque pitchforks and devils doesn't really exist. Well, that caused a bit of an upset in the Vatican, which is going overboard. And the Vatican has already come on out trying to retract the statement and accusing reporter Eugenio Scalfari of reconstructing the pontiff's words. The Vatican is also getting ready to hold exorcism training sessions for priests to deal with a surge in reports of demonic possession. Now, in the Middle Ages, demonic possession was another word for drug trip because of the ergot mold on the rye bread. Because they didn't understand the chemistry or that the mold was the problem. They just, oh, he's possessed by devils. Megachurch pastor has been indicted for $3.5 million fraud. And this guy was the former religious advisor to President George W. Bush. Pastor Kerb John Caldwell and a business partner apparently sold millions of dollars of worthless Chinese bonds, telling investors to remain faithful and that they would receive their money. Okay, for every credibility gap, there's a gullibility fill. Now, over in the Crozier's clergy abuse case, there has been a $25 million settlement agreed on between the Crozier's religious order and various victims of clergy sexual abuse. The Croziers have now emerged from Chapter 11 as the U.S. Bankruptcy Court confirmed the reorganization plan to allow the Croziers to settle on that debt. Now, $5.7 million will be paid directly by the Croziers, and just short of $19 million will be paid by their insurers. Changing gears here rapidly, article just went up at whatreallyhappened.com. So what blows up next? Investor psychology shifts to the dark side. And it's talking about how investors are bailing out on the corporate social media, Facebook, Google, Twitter, and how this has actually changed the investors' priorities. They're looking for the next Facebook. But in addition to looking at, obviously, something that's got a huge user base and growing and potential, now they're taking the time to say, are these people doing something that could blow up in our faces down the road? And that's a very healthy direction for the investors to be looking at. Are the companies being invested in more than are they profitable? Are they behaving themselves? Are they being respectful to their customers? And I think that is a very, very healthy trend. Meanwhile, the FCC has authorized SpaceX to provide broadband satellite services. So we'll now start, apparently, be using satellites to connect our iPads and our tablets. Anyway, have a good weekend. Happy Easter. The Tiangong 1, they still don't know where that's going to come crashing to Earth. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.